Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the second of our Older Drivers Forum webinars for March 2021. Our last one last Thursday was extremely successful, and we had lots of interest from all our speakers and a load of questions coming through from lots of people. So we welcome you to today's and hope that you find it very useful. Little background about myself. My name's Rob Hurd. I'm the chair and I'm the founder of the Older Drivers Forum, and I'm actually a retired police officer. I retired back in July 2019 and was a road safety officer and a roads policing officer for around about 26 years. So hopefully I've got some knowledge to help and answer some questions later on at the end of all our sessions as well. So today we've got 5 speakers for you. We have a police officer first, introducing a bit more of the background about the Older Drivers Forum. And then we move on to a lady called June Howlett, who's a road safety officer from Buckinghamshire County Council, who'll be talking to us about driving appraisals and Eyesight, and also an online tool that they have for helping and giving advice to mature motorists. We also then go on to Graham Mylward from the Road Safety Officer from Hampshire County Council, who will talk to you on some subjects that we always have lots of questions on, which will be roundabouts, driving at night, and also we're talking this time on smart motorways as well, giving some interest for those who have some concerns about the new smart motorways which are popping up across our country. And then we'll have a short presentation by Greig from the IAM, who's asking for your support on some campaign that they're running with the Department for Transport. So after that, we will then run a question and answer session where all our panelists will be open to answer all the questions that you may want to put to us. So a little bit about house rules for you, just to let you know. This webinar is being recorded and therefore will be available to be viewed on our website 2 days after this event. So I will upload it within the next 2 days. So if you've missed it or friends want to see it, then you can direct them to our website and the events page and they should be able to see it. Just to let you know, the only people who will be visible and the only names that will be visible will be the presenters. So don't worry, yourselves won't be able to turn your cameras on and you won't be able to put your sound on and your names won't appear to anybody else, just to me as the host. Also, just to let you know, we do urge you, if you wish to ask questions, then please use the Q&A button, which you'll find on either the top or bottom of your computer with the Zoom account. And on that, we will be able to put the details for you about filling in those, how to answer the question. So just fill in your question on there, and then I will monitor those and I'll ask them to all the presenters at the end. So if you could just type them as we're going along, it's much easier than putting them all at the end, because otherwise I get completely lost with so many coming in all at the end. So please just type them in as the questions pop up to you. Can't promise we'll answer all of them, because last time we had a huge number, which is great, but I will try and ask the most relevant ones for us today. Just to let you know, the chat button is disabled, so there's no point putting anything in there. And just to start us off, it's always useful to know who is our audience with us today. And therefore, I'm going to run a couple of polls. Now, you may not have been able to do these before. Basically, it's just a little bit of a background. So the first one, I'm just going to launch up on the screen to you now. All I'd like you to do is tick next to what age group you actually fit in under. So if you'd like to do that for me, please. That's it. I'll just let a few more people. At the moment, we've got 357 people have joined us today, which is fantastic. 72% have voted at the moment. Okay, pretty much most 75% of us have voted. So just to let you know, I'll share those results with you and you may be able to see them. But basically, we've got 21% of people are over 60, 56% of people between 70 and 79, and 21% over 80. And we have some great people over 90 joining us, which is fantastic to see that as well. So it was wonderful that we're targeting the right audience. So hopefully give you all that information you need. Just going to run one more with you. So if you'd like to just have a go at this for us as well. This just gives me a little bit of a background about the type of people who are watching us today. So are you a mature driver? Are you interested family member? Am I interested family friend or of a mature driver? Or am I a road safety professional? Or are you someone else? That's great. So far, 98% of you are mature drivers. So we're obviously targeting this towards that audience, and that's great. Rightio. Just wait for a few more people to pop their answers in. Nearly there now. Okay, I shall end that poll now and I'll show you the results, which again shows there we are 97% of you are mature drivers, and we've got a couple of family members, which is great, and some interested friends and a road safety professionals as well, and some others as well. So thank you very much. So with further ado, what I'm going to do is turn to our first speaker today. So our first speaker today is PC Liz Johnson. She's the Road Safety Officer for Hampshire and Thames Valley Police. So Liz, if you'd like to turn on your camera and your sound, that would be wonderful. Hello, Liz. Welcome to our webinar. I'll leave you in the capable hands of Liz.
Good morning, everyone. I'll go straight into sharing my screen with you. Okay. So good morning, my name is PC Liz Johnson. I'm the Road Safety Officer for the Joint Operations Unit with Thames Valley and Hampshire Police. I've been on the Roads Policing Department for 20 years and have investigated many collisions, and am Family Liaison Officer for those that have been involved in serious road traffic collisions and road crash deaths. Now, road traffic collisions aren't accidents, they're all avoidable if you make the right choices and take responsibility for the actions whilst driving on our roads and other road users. As mature drivers, it's really important that you maintain your independence. It was a joy and a privilege to pass your driving test, either at the age of 17 or maybe it was slightly older. And DVLA gave you the responsibility and gave you a driving license to drive, as you could demonstrate to the driving instructor that you were a careful and competent driver. Some drivers have had further driving education, a bit like myself, and other drivers haven't had any other form of education. Rob, who's kindly hosting today's webinar, created the Older Drivers Forum, as he's already said, and there's some really useful information on there that can help more mature drivers, their relatives, friends and families to keep them driving safely on the roads for longer. Now, we retire from work when it gets too much, and there comes a time when we have to plan about retiring from driving too. For those that don't know, the Older Driver Forum was created in 2013 following a serious injury, a road traffic death on Hampshire, and it was codenamed Operation Squire. Operation Squire was a case which involved an 89-year-old driver, Dr. Waddell. He was driving his Volvo down the A30 dual carriageway near Basingstoke in Hampshire, and he drove the wrong way of the carriageway for at least a mile in March 2011. Dr. Waddell ended up driving head-on with another vehicle that was travelling in the opposite direction. The 28-year-old driver of this vehicle, Neil Cahoon, died at the scene when his car caught fire after the collision. Dr. Waddell was taken to hospital with serious injuries and was interviewed in hospital for causing death by dangerous driving. Inquiries revealed that Dr. Waddell had recently had a cataracts operation on one eye, and a couple of weeks before the collision. The day before the collision, he'd also lost the sight in one eye, and this left him with having virtually no sight in one eye and below the legal limit in the other. Following further medical evidence, it was also shown that Dr. Waddell may have had an onset of dementia and possible brain bleed prior to the collision. This could have affected his decision making, and the CPS prior to the trial agreed to take no further action in relation to death by dangerous and accepted a plea for death by careless driving due to concerns over the signage and possible U-turn on the road. On Friday, the 10th of August 2012, Dr. Waddell was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment, which was suspended for 2 years, and he was given a lifetime disqualification. The family was satisfied with the sentence, and to get further convictions in future cases are now trying to get the law changed via local MPs to get compulsory eyesight tests for older drivers. Now, the judge, in summing up, said to Dr. Waddell, "You ignored the no entry arrows or no entry signs, the arrows and the road markings indicating where you should have gone. You travelled 1 mile down the wrong direction. Other road users tried to get you to realise your error, but you didn't. And then there was a head-on collision. By your plea, you accept your standard of driving was below that of a careful and competent driver, and you should not have been on the road that night. Elderly who think that they can drive and those that care for them should think very carefully about whether they should be able to drive on the roads. It's a form of arrogance that some people think they should be able to exercise their right to drive." Now, this case involved an extremely high media interest and interviews with the BBC, Meridian, local and national papers. And subsequently, a documentary on the case for older drivers was made by the BBC for the Inside Out programme. There are many incidents like this occurring across the country on a daily basis, but luckily, not all end up involving a serious injury or death. So it's really important not to become complacent. Have your eyes checked regularly, and if you feel unwell, please don't get behind the wheel of a car and then drive. I want you to be able to continue driving for as long as you know you are safe to do so. And if you have any concerns about a relative, friend or neighbour about their ability to drive, then have that conversation. It will be awkward, I know. My dad was 76 when he stopped driving, not because he wanted to, but because I wouldn't let him. His car had so many dents and scratches where he had bumped into walls, posts, and goodness knows what else, as the depth perception wasn't good enough and he couldn't see properly. It was a gradual decline. Unfortunately, his circumstances changed, which meant that he could actually move nearer to me. And he moved into a warden-controlled retirement flat in my village, and I could take him shopping, to the hospital, and to visit friends. He was a good driver and still had his wits about him, but his eyesight and his slow reactions meant he wasn't safe to drive anymore. Don't let it be too late to make those small changes and have regrets about planning to retire from driving when the time comes. Being able to drive also requires you to have a valid driving license for a category of vehicle which you are driving. Now, whether that's the old paper license or photocard license, it must have your current address on with a valid date. The drivers need to renew their driving licence at the age of 70 and get a photocard licence. Now, this can be done online through the DVLA website for car and motorbikes or through the post office. Now, if you're renewing a Class C1, which is medium-sized vehicles, or D1, a minibus, you must do this by post, but it is free. Now, if your licence expired between the 1st of February and the 31st of December 2020, whilst we were in the pandemic, it has actually been extended for 11 months due to this, and it's quite often referred to as Section 88. You do still have to remember, though, to renew your driving licence. Now, if your driving licence expires from the 1st of January 2021, you need to apply for it in the normal way, and that's within 90 days of it expiring. Now, I understand that applications for the renewal of driving licence is taking a little bit longer at the moment. However, you can still drive whilst this renewal process is being completed, as long as you are still fit to drive and nothing medically has changed. More information about renewing your driving licence can be found at the government website. In order to renew your driving license, you need to sign a form confirming that you are fit to drive, that you can read a number plate at 20 meters in daylight conditions. So this is a good opportunity for you to actually measure out 20 meters from your home, from your driveway, and look at the number plate at your neighbours. Can you read your neighbour's number plate? And if you do that on a weekly basis, then you know that your eyesights are okay for driving at the moment. Now do this on a weekly basis just to make sure your eyesight hasn't changed, because if it's a gradual decline, you may not notice. If it has declined, then go and see an optician. You can get a lot of things rectified quite easily. Now, you are also responsible for notifying DVLA of any medical conditions or disabilities. So that's things like diabetes or taking insulin, syncope, fainting, some heart conditions, sleep apnea, epilepsy, strokes, or glaucoma. And again, more details on medical conditions can be found on the government website. Now, the demographics of those holding driving licenses in the UK in September 2020, there are just over 5.5 million people holding a driving license who are aged 70 or above. The oldest person holding a driving license at the moment is aged 107. So the number of drivers is increasing at around 250,000 a year, and it's expected to double, if not treble, in the next 20 years. Children born today have a life expectancy of 100 years. So we are all living longer. So this graph here shows how many car drivers involved in compared to how many people hold driving licenses. So there are three colours. The rusty coloured orange is 2010. The brighter orange is taken in 2014, and then the blue is 2019. So as you can see, those drivers that are aged between 17 and 19 have the most amount of collisions per the amount of people holding driving licenses. And those aged 70 above have very few collisions. So it's only about 10% of all our older drivers that hold a current driving license are a higher risk of being involved in a collision. So that just shows that you are actually the safest group of drivers on our roads. But this is where you mustn't become complacent. And I will talk to you further about what you can do to keep yourself and others safe on the roads. Okay, this little graph here, the blue line is for males and the red line is for females. And drivers at 70 are no more likely to be the cause of a crash than any other driver. If you look at the very bottom of the screen here, you're no more likely to be involved in a collision. However, drivers over 85 are 4 times more likely to cause a crash than to be the innocent victim of one. Now, younger male drivers, which is this blue line here, and older females, which is the red line on the other side, have the most collisions, which are two completely different sections of our society. Young males, as they tend to be out at night and go faster through either peer pressure or excitement, but don't have the experience or the fear factor yet. And older females, on the other hand, are suddenly thrown back into the driving seat. They've been a passenger most of their lives with their partners taking care of the driving. And sometimes their partner has to stop driving or has stopped driving, and then they're expected to drive. So their confidence and their experience has faded. So research shows that drivers who do less than 2,000 miles a year have an increased risk of collision. Now, drivers who tend to stay local and do familiar journeys, i.e. to the shops, the doctors, are generally fine. It's when they suddenly have to do a longer journey or one that they are unfamiliar with. So that may be due to a road closure, a diversion route that causes the problems. You also got to look at the cost. Is it cost effective to have a car if you're doing less than 2,000 miles a year? Think about how much you spend on insurance, tax, the wear and tear, the fuel costs of servicing, MOT, it all does add up. Compare that to how much a taxi ride is, and of course, peace of mind. Or if someone's going to take you, let them do the driving. Now, drivers over 65 take about 22% longer to identify a hazard and then react to it. And if you're traveling at 70 miles an hour, that's an additional 2 car lengths. So in your mid-70s, drivers start to have problems assessing complex or high-speed situations. Older drivers, they need to have more time to process the information. They make slower decisions and fail to predict hazards as quick. They're less likely to speed, but more likely to be involved in a crash involving a right-of-way violation. Most collisions occur at the right turn T-junctions. And older drivers have difficulties in merging with faster traffic from a slip road, and sometimes difficult in conducting a visual search. Drivers under 20 and over 65 experience pedal error crashes, and they're 4 times more likely than any other age group. But all is not lost. So here are some coping strategies. What can you do? So drive at a quieter, less congested time of the day. Plan every journey, giving yourself plenty of time, allowing for stops. Avoid driving at night and in bad weather, and keep your car well maintained. Remember to do those powders checks. And powders relates to petrol or diesel. Do I have enough for my journey? Oil. Have you checked your oil recently? Water, is there sufficient water in the coolant and also in the washer fluid? Is there any damage that could affect your ability to see out of the windscreen or to the tyres? And your electrics, do all your lights work? Are your brake lights working? R stands for rubber, that's effectively the tyres on your vehicle, and also your windscreen washer wipers. Really important that they are maintained. Check your tyres to make sure there aren't any lumps or bulges, tears, or any cord exposed. And obviously have a service regularly. But don't wait till your service in order to do those checks. Those powder checks ideally should be done on every journey, but certainly once a week. Don't forget, you can also use the park and ride. So you can drive to the local park and ride, park your car up, and then take the bus into town. Get familiar how these buses work, and also avoid congestion in the towns. So some tips to increase your driver safety. Take regular exercise to improve strength and flexibility. You need to be able to pull on that handbrake, steer, and be able to look all around you if you can. Exercise is also good to keep you more alert too. Leave an appropriate distance between yourself and the car in front. Do you remember that 2-second rule? Only a fool breaks the 2-second rule. If you're following a vehicle, when that vehicle goes past a set point in the road, you then say to yourself, only a fool breaks the 2-second rule. And at that point, you should then go past the same mark. That gives you plenty of time for thinking and stopping distance. Avoid distractions in the car, whether that's your pet, your mobile phone, or the radio, and make sure your passengers understand this is your car, these are your rules, so please don't distract me. And consider alternatives to driving. Think about the bus, taxis, community transports, accept lifts if they're offered, or you might even think about more walking, cycling, or even using a mobility scooter. And remember, have your eyes checked at least once a year. Those aged 60 and over, it's free. So some safe driving strategies for you. Keep your eyes moving, look all around you and keep looking. The situation changes all of the time. Try commentary driving. Talk about the hazards as you see them whilst you're driving along. And using a lower gear, especially in town, 30 mile an hour speed limit, a third gear is the best gear to use. And if you have an automatic, sometimes you can manually select third gear. And remember that you are in charge of your vehicle and the decisions that you make. Other road users mustn't influence you. Don't let yourself be intimidated into taking risks. And don't be distracted by what the drivers behind you might be thinking. Pull over and let them pass. Concentrate on making sensible assessment of the situation in front of you. If your view is in any way obscured, you'll need to take some action to improve it, such as maybe slowly edging forward. We call that peep and creep. And remind yourself that there will eventually be a gap in the traffic. You won't be at this junction forever. And in fact, it might be safer to actually turn left down to the next roundabout, turn around to go right. It won't take any more time, and you may feel safer to do this. Now, I've got some questions for you, so test yourself. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? And I want you to be honest. I believe I can deal safely with risky situations on the road. Might you be biased in your assessment of your own driving skills? Ask a friend or relative to give you some feedback on the drive, or have a driving assessment with an approved driving instructor. 2. If I felt my driving was becoming safe, I would change my driving habits. Are you willing to make some of those changing to your driving habits? If your skills aren't as good as they were, follow the advice given. Every day is a school day, and there's always room for improvement. Question 3. My driving skills aren't as good as they used to be. If you feel that you're struggling to cope, there may be a reason. For older drivers, distraction is more likely to be to a decline in visual or cognitive faculties. That's basically anything that relates to the mental process, such as thinking, learning, and remembering. Minor collisions in car parks have been linked to the first signs of dementia. Now, none of us want to think about that. However, you also don't want to be driving and getting lost because you can't remember the way home. This can be really upsetting and frightening for somebody. We often find elderly missing persons miles away from home in their car because there was a diversion and they had to go on a different route and couldn't get back home on the normal way. It might be time that they seek medical advice, so have a chat with your GP. So what else can you do? You can get an up-to-date copy of the Highway Code. When was the last time you read it? Remind yourself. It's also online for you to browse. Consider further training or assessment by an approved driving instructor. Here in Buckinghamshire, there is Be a Better Driver that I'm sure June will cover. There are also organisations like the IAM and RoadSmart that do driving assessments for you. All this information can be found on the Older Drivers Forum website. If you look under advice, there are also links to the law and those DVLA requirements that I spoke about earlier. I will now hand you back to Rob. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Liz, for that. That's wonderful. Great presentation as always, and really useful. In fact, lots of questions from that. So we'll use those when we come back into the Q&A section. So thank you, everybody, for putting through your questions and things. So what we're going to do is now move over to June. June is the Road Safety Officer for Buckinghamshire Council, and she's going to talk to us today about driving appraisals, Eyesight, and like I said, her online tool. So welcome, June. I will hand it over to your capable hands.
Thank you, Rob. Just bear with me, everybody, while I get my presentation up ready for you. And hopefully you can now all see that. Right, good morning then. My name's June Howlett. I'm a road safety officer at Buckinghamshire Council, and I'm responsible for all the road safety education, training and publicity throughout the county. So this includes campaigns and driver training, which is aimed at the most vulnerable road user groups, of which older drivers are featuring more and more in our collisions. But I think that's not altogether surprising, as Liz has already been outlining, the number of older drivers is increasing year on year. So during the presentation, I'm going to give you an overview of the Buckinghamshire Mature Driver Assessment Scheme. I'll cover some of the data that guides us on what to include, how to apply, and what happens on an assessment, feedback during and after, and how we support drivers after the assessment, eyesight and hazard perception. And this is just a flavour of the Buckinghamshire scheme, but they are being delivered all over the UK by other local authorities or organisations. And I'll give you details at the end where you can find out about assessments in your area. So Liz has given you information on the increasing number of older drivers, and I'll now give you an overview of where on the road you are more vulnerable. In Buckinghamshire, we looked at the type of collisions that older drivers were having and found that they're mainly rights-of-way collisions, so junctions, especially turning right across opposing traffic, roundabouts, merging from a slip road and changing lanes. And this could be due to a poor visual search, misjudging the speed or distance of other vehicles, or failing to see a hazard. And this links to the top 3 contributory factors recorded by Thames Valley Police for older driver collisions, which are failed to look properly, failed to judge other person's path or speed, and careless, reckless in a hurry. And it's interesting to note that the main contributory factors for older drivers are in fact similar to those recorded for younger groups. We found from data and speaking to older drivers that they're most likely to be at fault in reversing collisions. And many of these happen on driveways and in car parks. Some may be pedal confusion or not looking properly before reversing. So do please take extra care when you're reversing. Since 2001, Buckinghamshire had been running a scheme called SAGE, Safer Driving with Age. And this was a basic driving assessment delivered by any driving instructor that was interested. And I think we had something like 200 instructors delivering this. Drivers got the application form signed by their doctor to say there was no medical reason why they couldn't take an assessment. And this did work quite well until 2011, when the doctors started charging to get the form signed and we started getting complaints about the cost. So this actually seemed like a good time for us to review the scheme, see if it was still needed, and if it was still fit for purpose. And as I said on the previous slide, our data did indicate an increase in the number of older drivers being killed or injured. So we decided to update our scheme to include information about where they're most vulnerable, the types of crashes they're most likely to be involved in, and health issues that affect drivers as they age. So we now have 8 approved driving instructors that deliver the scheme. We've given them all specialist training at our local mobility centre, and this was to improve their level of awareness on issues that affect drivers as they age and what simple changes or adaptations are available. And importantly, knowledge on where to signpost drivers for further help. We didn't want the assessment just to be about fault finding, but rather for a way for the assessors to work with drivers to make them aware of where they're most at risk and to help them manage or reduce the risk. And by using a small pool of driving instructors, we can meet for training and chat on a regular basis, as there's always something new that comes up for discussion. And because they're delivering these assessments all the time, we can be sure that they're delivered in a consistent way. And I think all our instructors have become really knowledgeable, and they're very experienced, and they all say how much they enjoy delivering these assessments and find them really satisfying. And we decided that as our assessments are just simple confidence givers, then we would no longer require the application to be signed by the doctor. But we do ask applicants to declare any medical conditions so we can check that we're actually the right organisation to help them. We spoke to many agencies and organisations, and we're aware that if a driver loses their licence, then they may also lose their ability to socialise, and they can become very isolated, which leads to many problems. And we go to a number of events for older drivers, and many of the drivers we spoke to were actually thinking of giving up driving, perhaps before they need to, either because of pressure from family or their own anxiety about driving. And we encourage these drivers to take an assessment, as our scheme aims to support them to keep them driving for as long as they can safely do so or want to. And we're also there to support and advise families. The objective of the assessment is to determine if a driver is safe to be driving on the road, and if not, identify what can be done to help. Most of those that take an assessment say that they're taking it to update their skills and to check they're still safe. And some may not have driven for a while due to ill health, or suddenly have to start driving due to their partner being ill or giving up driving themselves. So the process starts with the client applying or being signposted to us by a healthcare provider. I assign an assessor who will contact them directly to book their drive. They then meet the client at their own home and spend a little time completing the paperwork, which is the form that you can see there on the screen. And this gives the assessor an overview of the type of driving they do, confidence levels, and any areas of concern they may have before we even get in the car. They also complete an eyesight test before the drive, as Liz was outlining. So reading a car number plate from 20 metres with glasses or contact lenses if you wear them. And if you cannot do this, then you shouldn't be driving and the drive won't go ahead. And we have had to abandon some because of drivers not being able to read a number plate. The assessments are conducted in the client's own vehicle on roads that they're familiar with, and the whole process lasts about an hour and a half. And the drive's based on the type of driving they do and what they want to achieve. So if they don't want to go up the motorway, we don't make them, but we support them to do it if they want to. If they want to look at a junction or a new road layout that's been bothering them, then that's what we do. Some people want to practice parking or going into a new car park or a route they haven't done before. And occasionally we get drivers that have changed their cars and they want someone to help them familiarize with it and how to use the technology on it. Garages aren't always great at explaining that, and as I know, the car manuals can be really confusing. But the drive is basically built around the driver and any concerns that they might have. The drive does include a parking exercise, perhaps at a supermarket or a garden centre. And this is an opportunity for us to highlight the risks when parking or reversing. This first part of the drive is about 15 minutes and then a stop for a chat and some feedback. We would discuss with them how the drive went, anything that happened during the drive, and the assessor will give any feedback they have or suggestions for improvements, which the driver can then practice on the second part of the drive. And by this point, everyone has usually started to relax and they're just driving as normal. Generally, they tell us they enjoy the drive. And for many, it may be the first time that they've actually had anyone assess their driving since they passed their driving test. Before we start the second part of the drive, there's a short micro lesson on eyesight and hazard perception, but I'll go into that in more detail later. There may be another stop if needed to discuss anything, but otherwise the drive will finish back at the house. At the end of the drive, there's a debrief, which family members or interested parties are welcome to listen to if the driver wants them to. We ask how the driver felt the drive went, as it's really important for us to get the driver's impression of how they think they did, so we can see if that correlates with the assessor's opinion of the drive. Notes from the drive are recorded on the form, which is shared with the driver, so all the comments and thoughts can be discussed to ensure that everything's understood. And quite often there are questions on things that happened during the drive, and the assessors have diagrams that they can show to help explain anything that's not clear. There are some things that come up on many drives. A lot seem to relate to observation, roundabouts and positioning, junctions and reversing, plus gears, mirrors, speed limits and hazard recognition. I do remember one of the instructors telling me about a lady who said that she hated turning right across a busy main road when she was leaving her estate. She told the instructor that she usually went left down to the roundabout, went round it and came back up the other way. But she said she felt that as an experienced motorist, she should be able to cross that road. And as the assessor told her, she'd actually come up with a great solution to take the stress out of it, reduce the risk, and it probably took no longer. So don't be afraid to simplify things for yourself. If there's a safer, easier way to do it, then that would seem to me a really good choice. On the image there is one of our more famous faces that took an assessment, Paddy Hopkirk, who won the Monte Carlo Rally in 1964 in a red Mini, and he still drives a red Mini, and it was certainly quite an assessment. Mostly drivers will know how they've done, so the result isn't usually a surprise. And there are a range of options our assessors can give at the end of the drive. 3 main outcomes, but with lots of grey areas in between. But briefly, they are satisfactory, but with a few recommendations to work on. And this is the outcome for the majority of our clients. If all has gone well, then we agree a reassessment date and write to remind them nearer the time, generally somewhere between 1 and 3 years. The assessors may feel that the client would benefit from some further lessons if there are areas of concern. And this is about 5% of clients, and the majority do take the extra lessons. And again, we'd agree another assessment date for them in the future. Or it may be that we feel we can't help as it's outside our scope. And this would be about 2% of clients. And then we'd refer them to the mobility centre for more specialist support. Ours is a simple assessment, just about reassurance, building confidence and supporting drivers as they age. A way to check their driving's okay for their peace of mind. But we are not medically trained, and the mobility centres are there for drivers that we cannot help. In the majority of these cases where the drive is unsafe, the driver usually knows that the time has come to cease driving, and they're generally looking for a professional opinion to confirm their own thoughts. Sometimes drivers tell us they feel pressure to keep driving, perhaps because they're being relied on to drive other family members. And this can be difficult when they recognise that perhaps they shouldn't be driving. And we do try to work with those drivers and see what options are available to help them to stay mobile. There are many volunteer organisations that can help when there are no regular bus routes. For those that live in Buckinghamshire, the Community Transport Hub provides information on all aspects of community transport, from dial-a-ride to community car schemes, minibus hire to wheelchair accessible taxis. But do be assured, we do everything we can to support a driver to keep driving until they're no longer safe. We also encourage drivers to consider occasionally using public transport if it's available, as well as their own car. So if a time comes to retire from driving, the thought of using buses and taxis isn't too overwhelming or scary. All the assessments are followed up with a completion certificate and a full report of the drive and any recommendations. Some drivers share these with their doctors and family members. Most drivers are happy to agree to a reassessment in the future, and about a third of all our drivers each year are reassessments. And once someone's had an assessment, I think they see the benefit of it. It's like having a regular health check for your driving. And I think they realize if they keep their skills up, then they should be able to drive with confidence in the future. I mentioned earlier, when we stop for a break, the assessor will ask the driver to complete a vision and hazard perception mini lesson. And the aim of this is to increase awareness of several issues that drivers may experience in the future. To drive safely, you obviously need to be able to see properly. And we all know that as we age, our eyesight deteriorates, although this often happens gradually. But these changes can make it difficult to see road signs and other road users, especially in low light, and this can affect how quickly we react to things. When driving at night or in poor light, older drivers may experience problems with depth perception, increased peripheral vision, and one of the most common problems, seeing halos around street lights and headlights. If that's a problem for you, ask your optician to check for cataracts, astigmatism, or glaucoma. But be aware the halos may actually be caused by something as simple as a dirty windscreen or grubby glasses. So please do make sure both are clean before you set off. The time taken to regain our sight after being dazzled by car lights or the sun increases with age. For example, at 15, your eyesight will recover from glare in 2 seconds, whereas at 65, this increases to around 9 seconds, which may explain why we don't particularly like driving at night. Our field of vision also reduces as we age, and by the time we're in our 70s, we could have lost between 20 and 30 degrees of our peripheral vision. And this obviously can lead to difficulties when making decisions, emerging at junctions, or changing lanes. And all of these are areas where older driver collisions occur. And in severe cases, this loss of peripheral vision can become tunnel vision, which can make driving dangerous, as you may not see a hazard appearing from the side until it's too late. Some common eyesight problems, cataracts, which form on the lens of the eye, and they make things look cloudy. This leads to blurred vision and sensitivity to glare. Macular degeneration, a common eye condition that causes problems seeing detail. Vision becomes blurred in the center or gives distorted vision. Glaucoma, caused by increased pressure inside the eye and damages the optic nerve, resulting in loss of peripheral vision. Retinitis pigmentosa, and this also causes tunnel vision, resulting in side vision loss. Diabetes retinopathy results in patches of vision loss and can cause variable or blurred vision. And it's not just older drivers. 33% of people over 40 are affected by glaucoma, cataracts, blindness, and macular degeneration. Drivers aged 70 years and over, as Liz has already outlined, must renew their license every 3 years and declare that they still meet the medical standard to drive, including the vision standard. So if you have any concerns about your eyesight, do make an appointment to see your optician or optometrist as soon as possible before it gets any worse. The Royal National Institute of Blind People estimates that if detected early, half of sight loss can be avoided. And eyesight tests are free for people aged 60 and over. So please make sure you have regular checks, and also make sure you ask for a field of vision test, which can check your peripheral vision, and as this isn't always done as standard. And please don't forget that a clean windscreen on the inside and outside makes it easier to see what's ahead. We also highlight how our hazard perception skills can decline with age, but this can be improved with video-based training, which can be found on our older driver module. I'll give you details about that at the end. On the practical drive, we talk about visual searches, where and when to look, scanning, spotting, recognizing hazards early, which can all help to improve reaction time. We discuss help in the form of additional mirrors to help with that reduced field of vision, blind spot mirrors, and moving the head more, especially at junctions, obviously unless there are issues with mobility. There was a study released at the beginning of March this year that identified that drivers with eye disease and associated visual impairment are not as good at hazard perception and had significantly delayed response times. The study also noted that slower response times are associated with increased crash risk and poorer driving in both younger and older drivers. So as you can see, this all links to taking good care of your eye health with regular checks to prevent eye conditions becoming worse than they maybe need to be. Who takes the driving assessment? It really varies. The majority are in their male and in their 80s, which is great, especially as we identified the risks going up with age, especially when you're in your 80s. The oldest that's done one of our assessments is 98, so we're still waiting for our 100-year-old driver. We average about 150 a year, but not this year, obviously due to COVID, but hopefully we'll soon be back on track. I'm meeting with my assessors next week to discuss how we roll out the assessment scheme, as soon as we're allowed to start back. Our mature driver assessment is our most popular assessment. And I think it's because it's non-threatening and it really does aim to support drivers. We attend public events such as health fairs to promote these assessments, and that really does give us a chance to explain what it's about and reassure drivers that it's designed to help them, not to stop them from driving. We developed an online module for drivers as they age and their families. And this covers many of the issues that I and Liz have spoken of, but it also includes information on medication, fatigue, distraction, journey planning, information about the vehicle, adaptions and licensing. There are also some of the hazard perception videos I mentioned to help you practice your scanning techniques. In all, it takes about 15 minutes to complete and it's free to access. The address is on the screen and there's a QR code in the corner if anyone knows how to use that. But if you want any more information on it, then my details are on the next slide, so you can contact me. There's also a module on speed management. Again, it's free. It takes about 10-15 minutes. And that's quite good for helping you with recognizing speed limits for the type of road you're on, the type of vehicle you're driving, lots of hints and tips for how to drive within the speed limit. And our final module is winter driving. So hopefully we're not going to need that anymore this year, but it's a good refresher to go in there and have a look and see, there's tips about you preparing your car, driving in winter weather, what to carry in your car. So definitely worth having a look at that, perhaps before next winter. I've added some useful contact details on this slide. So for more information on our older driver assessments and the e-learning module, there's my email and the web address. The Older Driver Forum, and this is where you can find out about driving assessments offered nationally, and there's just so much useful information on there. Definitely worth having a look to see what you didn't know on there. It's really useful. The Driving Mobility website, that's for more specialist help. And the Buckinghamshire Community Transport Hub, it's a telephone number there, but they're really, really helpful. So I hope this information was useful and maybe even makes you consider an assessment. Thank you ever so much for listening, and I will hand you back to Rob now.
Thank you very much. That's wonderful. Great talk as ever, always from June, and lots of useful information for everybody there. I think the really important things you pick up from that is that, you know, don't become complacent. When we do reach that age of 17, we come to renew our license. It's really important that we kind of decide to honestly tick those boxes on the renewal. So think about going and having an eyesight test, think about having a driving appraisal, because we all need to brush up on our skills. We all pick up bad habits as we drive, and it's always good to tick those boxes with honesty to say, you know what, I am safe. And as June said, if you look on the Older Drivers website, there's a page called courses on there, and that will give you links to all the current courses and assessments that exist across the country closest to you. And we can chat about that a little bit later. Now, one thing I wanted to just do is a couple of more little bits of polls with you, if I may. So I just wanted to do a couple on eyesight, because we were talking about that. So the first one I'm going to share with you is, have you had an optician's eyesight test in the last 2 years? So if you'd just like to take part in that, that would be fantastic. Really good at the moment. We're having around about 90% of people are saying that they have, which is great news. So let's just a few more people to take part in the poll. We're up to 90% of you voting. Thank you very much for taking part. Okay, I shall end the poll there. And I'll just share you those results so that you can all see them. So 92% of people have had an eyesight test in the last 2 years. That's really great. One of the things the Older Drivers Forum does recommend is that you actually think about doing one every year. It's always a good idea, because suddenly things can creep up, as June was saying, without us being aware, and it's really useful to do that. So one last one, I'm just going to have a quick go with you as well. After you're listening to June's presentation, I wonder if you could just see what you think on this. Would you be in favor of being compulsory? Would you be in favor of it being compulsory to have an optician's eyesight test at license renewal at 70? So when you come to renew your license, you are required to go and have an eyesight test with the optician. So interested to see what your thoughts, as we have 98% of us are fitting in that age group. So a few more to vote at the moment. So we are now up to nearly 90% of all of you. So out of that, we have got, just to let you know, I shall end the poll there. So, and I'll share you the results. So that shows that 95% of you would agree and 5% wouldn't. So thank you very much for your support on that. One last one that we're just going to go in, where our next speaker is going to be Graham, and he's going to be talking about some safe driving, various different things. So one of the things I'm going to do is just see about the important factor: when was the last time that any one of us really looked at the highway code? So when was the last time you read that highway code? Something that all of us perhaps have failed to do a little bit, really, isn't it? It changes probably every year, every 2 years, with new little regulations, and it's always good to keep a brush up on your skills on those. So just a few more people to have. Really interesting. Quite a few of you, 32% at the moment, are showing not since your driving test, which is a common thing. Right, I shall just end that poll there. I'll share you the results so you can all see those. So as you can see, 32% haven't since their driving test, which is something I would expect. 27% not in the last 10 years, 21% not in the last 5 years. And well done, everybody, in those 8% and in the last year, and 11% in the last 2 years. That's really good. So something we all should be pretty much doing. So thank you very much for taking part in those polls. I'm now going to hand you over to Graham Mylward. Graham Mylward is the Senior Road Safety Officer for Hampshire County Council. And actually, he does run the Driver Skills 60+ scheme for Hampshire County Council, which some of you have undertaken, I know, from the comments you've been putting in the Q&A box. He's going to talk about roundabouts, driving at night, and some smart motorway stuff. So, Graham, if you'd like to join us, that would be fantastic.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Just do the normal sharing and I'll be with you. Okay, there we go. So hopefully everybody can hear me and see that. As Rob said, roundabouts, night driving and smart motorways. The smart motorways element was a late addition. So I was aiming for around about 20 minutes. It may take a bit longer than that, clearly, with that in there. Driver Skills Scheme 60+, I've been running for 12 years now. And in that time, more than actually 5,000 driving reports from people across Hampshire have come across my desk, some of which I've read with, a small number I've read with great interest and had to take further action on, but most of them it's just a case of checking it's no spelling mistakes, etc. The reason actually why we start at 60+ is a very, very similar scheme to the one June just told you about. The reason we start at 60+ is because although 60 is quite a young age, you know, we've seen that people between, well, certainly up to 75 or 80 are actually amongst the safest drivers out there. But we have to recognize these very, very gradual changes come on. And it's not always easy to recognize them ourselves at the time. So the advice is to certainly have that monitored. But also, as we enter those older ages, it's really handy to make sure our habits are all nice and, you know, in a good place. And we're rid of all those bad habits. So that's enough from the introduction. We get on to roundabouts. I think there are two things that people struggle with sometimes on roundabouts, and that is joining the roundabout and leaving the roundabout, particularly after a right turn. So we'll just briefly talk about joining the roundabout, and I'll just try and bring up my little laser pointer here so it stands out a bit more. Roundabouts are designed to keep the traffic flow, of course, traffic flow. And so we're going to try to avoid a stop. But obviously sometimes we have to stop. So they're generally open junctions. We have an open view. That means as we're on the earlier approach, we're able to view onto the junction as well as check on the roundabout itself to see what's happening there. And by doing that, we can manage our speed with careful use of brake or sometimes even accelerator to get to the give way line at a point which coincides with a gap on the roundabout. And if we can do that, we can keep flowing, and that has major advantages over cars which maybe come up a bit too fast, not sure it's clear, hit the brakes, and have to come to a complete stop. We have lower energy coming out, and that also saves us fuel, and it cuts down the risk of rear-end collision, which happens quite a lot actually on roundabouts. Now we'll move on to the mini roundabout as well. The same type of effect happens there. They work better if we're able to keep some movement on the car. Now, normally on mini roundabouts, the view is not quite so good. We have to get that much nearer to the giveaway line before we can see it's clear to move. But that small amount of movement, if we can just sort of let it flow onto the roundabout whilst checking, be prepared to stop, but keep it moving very slowly, it helps with this situation, which people often ask me actually, is what happens when all three cars have stopped? 1, 2, 3. Who goes first? And of course, it's not an easy answer to that. And so my sort of answer really would be, if you can keep a little bit of movement going, you'll find it's much, much easier to actually join the roundabout. Not only because you're already moving, but that movement is a communication to the other vehicles that you intend to enter the roundabout. Far better than stopping and making a quick dart for a gap, which takes people by surprise. The other thing which I want to talk about here is we talked about the highway code recently, and we are required to actually go round the roundabout. So that means we have to slow down to make quite a tight turn sometimes and come round here. So when driver B is making a judgment about whether it's safe, what they should have to think about is clearing this danger area and therefore moving on to it before A comes all the way around here and gets to that danger area first. So that's what the judgment should be. However, what A often does is cut the roundabout. That's actually illegal, but what it does mean is they don't have to drop the speed so much, and the danger area moves forward to here. So therefore, it makes it much more difficult for B to join the roundabout, simply because a lot of drivers actually cut across the roundabout. So of course, on our judgment, we have to take account for that. And so the answer to people that say, should I give way if somebody's, coming up very fast to the roundabout that haven't got there yet? Well, self-preservation determines yes, really, because they often do that. So we'll just go on to sort of a sum up of that. So avoiding stop if safe, that's the key thing. Leaving the gap to the car in front. I didn't mention that at the time, but this situation where somebody in front's moved on to the roundabout, we're looking right to see where the next gap is, and they stop suddenly. So very important to allow the other car to get out of the way, leave a little bit of a gap. Give way to the right, of course, and don't cut the roundabout. Now, this is the picture from the highway code. So I'm just going to go over what it says in the highway code about roundabouts. And this is a straightforward standard roundabout. So for the first exit, like the brown car's doing, we signal left, we're in the left lane, and we keep the signal on until we've left the roundabout. If we're turning right, we're in the right-hand lane on the approach normally. We're signaling right until we get to a point, the exit prior to the one we want to take, and then we switch to a left signal and leave in the left-hand lane. We can leave in the right-hand lane, but there is often only one lane to leave. If we're taking an intermediate exit, so in this case, it's the one that's directly ahead of us, we can use the most appropriate lane. Now, normally the most appropriate driving position is to keep left. So normally we would do it from the left, but we can actually do it from the right lane. And sometimes we need to do that, particularly if we need this lane to exit. But it's best to do it in the left lane often. Now, the problem comes with, for most people, from what I understand, is this maneuver here, because we're in a restricted amount of space and we have to move from the right lane whilst steering around the right-hand corner. We have to move across to the left and keep it safe. In my view and experience, if we get 3 elements of this whole maneuver just right, we should never, or certainly very rarely, have a problem with that particular maneuver coming off the roundabout. So we'll just talk through those. The first one is the signal. So we signal right here. That's important to not only tell the cars coming up behind us that we intend to go further around, but it stops this car squeezing out onto the roundabout and causing us a problem. So we need to tell them we're going on round to there. The next important thing clearly is the left signal, because if somebody's coming up behind us where the problem normally comes from, we need to tell them we're coming across, and then move across very, very gradually so they can take in that information and allow us to do that. Where people, in my view, go wrong is this left signal comes on a little bit late. So we need split-second accuracy here, really. Even if you can imagine a half a second or a second later, if that left signal's on, we've moved a little bit further around, and it doesn't take much for people to mistake our intentions to think we're coming on around here. So as soon as it's safe, as soon as we've gone past a point at which no one can confuse it, being confused into thinking we're going down here, we get that left signal on that instant. That's really important. And then no sudden movements. We steer across gradually with that signal on after obviously checking to the left lane. That's the first one. The second one is we talked about the danger car coming up here. These are the ones that worry us just over our left shoulder. And normally, now those cars didn't come out of nowhere. They came from somewhere. So it's a case of tracking those vehicles as we come around the roundabout. First one is this blue car. It's unlikely, but possible that they come right round with us. So if they're just behind us, or the next car is just behind us, there is a little bit here. If we steer left, we've made our safe decision to move on to the roundabout. We're steering to the left. And just before we start the right steering, we've straightened up the steering wheel. And that's often a really convenient point to have a quick glance into our left door mirror, just to see the position and speed of that blue car there. The next danger point, probably the main one really, vehicles joining, particularly at speed from this junction. And of course, as we come up there, we can view them. We can see that, again, try and gauge their intention by the speed and position and where they're looking, etc. So as we come around here, we're aware in our peripheral vision, they may be there somewhere. So it becomes even more important to get this signal timing correct. So the position is the other one. The final thing is, if I'm the driver of this green car and I'm a little bit worried about that particular maneuver, various things happen then. I'm possibly going to go a little bit or much more slowly in some cases than all the other cars on the roundabout. When I get to here, I might put my left signal on even at the correct time. But then if I sense somebody may be a danger to me, I may put my brakes on, slow down a little bit. I'm afraid to come across. And what that does, it frustrates other drivers. Shouldn't do, but it does. And they're much more likely to try and nip past us, to get past us there. So I'm not saying to anybody they should rush around these roundabouts, but if you can, try and do it with a little bit of confidence, with care, and just let it flow. And if you don't do any sudden steering there, you should always be safe to come across. There is always a chance of putting the right signal on across and doing another circuit, but just check no one's being confused by that. Now, just applying those standard roundabout regular or rules to non-standard roundabouts. The left turn's obvious, first left signal, keep to the left. The right turn to the station here should be fairly obvious. The right-hand position, signal right. And then we just count the exits off and ready to signal at the fourth exit because this is the fifth. But this is the one, what some people refer to an intermediate. Some people will say it's more than halfway round, so you need to be in the right lane. So the fact is, on these type of roundabouts, people use either lane, particularly if this is just a car park or something. So just be very, very aware and don't always assume you're in the correct lane, particularly on those ones. We're also going to have a look at a video in a moment about spiral roundabouts, gyratory systems. And the idea of these, of course, is that you use these type of signboards to get in the correct lane. Once you're in the correct lane, you stay in that lane. No further lane changes are needed. So they become much easier to come round and leave without a lane change. When there are multiple lanes for the same direction, the one you want, you stay in. Normally easy to stay in the leftmost one. Still means you won't have to have a lane change, but it just makes it easier if you're not sure of the roundabout. So we'll just forward this. We'll play this this video here. Just 1 second. Yep, there we go. So we're looking at the signboard there. We're going to do a right turn towards Ring Road South. There's a local board up here. And then as we get a little bit nearer, there's a board here which tells us which lane to be in. We want the extreme right-hand lane. That is the one dedicated to Ring Road South, and it's itemized or marked down on the lane markings there. The ones on our left are both for a left turn to the A340, but this middle one's also for going straight ahead, second exit. As we come round, you'll see another signboard up on the left, which tells us this lane splits into two. So I'm going to stay near the left-hand side of this lane. There you go. We're both for right turns there. Both of these lanes are for the right turn. So I've stayed left here, and I've left a little bit of a gap here, because this car's looking a little bit suspicious. He's not actually signaling at the moment, but I'm suspecting he may do. And there the signal comes on. So we just let him flow into that gap there, not trying to block anybody, and it all flows nice and safely and smoothly. And we come off the roundabout after a right turn with no lane change needed. Okay, so that's roundabouts. Now we're going to move on to night driving. I think this has already been mentioned by Julian. As we get older, very gradual changes take place. Now, even with lower light conditions, our depth perception, ability to distinguish color and peripheral vision all get worse. And of course, that's on top of the aging factor, if you like. We know that eyes take longer to adjust to different light conditions. So those headlights and the screen there come towards us. If I'm 20 years old, my eyesight will be back to normal in a couple of seconds. But if I'm in my 80s, it's going to take much longer, and 7 or 8 seconds maybe, and that is a long time in driving whilst we're moving forward. So there's no doubt night vision does become more difficult as we age. So what's the aim at driving at night if we're going to do that? Well, it's the same as driving during the daytime, of course, to avoid a collision, one of the big aims, and to see vulnerable road users particularly, and that becomes much more difficult at night where they wear dark clothing, particularly. Some people use these night driving glasses. So I had a quick look at sort of research on those, and night driving glasses reduce glare by scattering and filtering out blue light. And of course, so what's happening there? It's reducing the amount of light coming into our eyes. Yellow lenses reduce the amount of light coming into the eye, diminishing visibility further. So at night, this, of course, can be detrimental rather than helpful. Visual tests indicate that night driving glasses do not improve night vision. You know, they may help with the glare a little bit, but they don't enable us to see, apparently, pedestrians any faster than they would without them. So there doesn't seem to be a benefit from that point of view there. So what can help? Well, first of all, we'll get rid of as much light as we can inside the car so we can focus on what's ahead of us, what's outside. Very extremely important to keep the windscreens clear of scratches, stone chips, and spotlessly clean if we're going to be driving at night, and the mirrors as well, of course. We often get blinded from people, dazzled by people with strong headlights behind us. So I'm sure you're all aware there's an adjustment on the rear view mirror where we click it down to another angle, and that gives us a secondary secondary image, which is not so bright, but we're still aware what's there. So that can be used. And when you have got a clear view, when you're not being dazzled by any oncoming vehicle, just scan the road ahead, see if there's any clues as to what's going on up there. And if you get to that point and you are then become dazzled, then at least you know what you're dealing with. So take any opportunity to have a good look at what's coming up. And as you'll be aware, I'm sure that when you look at strong headlights, it can make us tired. We can even go into a trance, and that's, we can become extremely dangerous. So the idea is just keep the eyes moving around, not focus on one thing for too long, just to avoid that eye fatigue. And as we talked about earlier, the advice would be certainly don't wear sunglasses or anything like that to avoid the dazzle. And I personally would certainly avoid using the night driving glasses from the research I've seen. And the only thing you can really do if you're dazzled by oncoming headlights is try concentrating on the near side curb area. We sort of tend to get drawn to looking at the lights often, but just looking at the left-hand curb, let the oncoming driver deal with us. We're looking at what we may run into on the left-hand side, like a pothole, a sort of a rock sticking up, or even worse, obviously, a pedestrian or a cyclist. So we're looking down there for those few seconds. And above all, we need to slow down or even stop. We have to be at a speed where we can stop within the distance we can see to be clear. Just trying to not make that stop sudden, trying to ease down where possible. Just anticipate the need to do that. Factors to consider. First one would be, of course, do you have to drive? I've taken the decision to avoid driving as much as I can in the dark because you can't see as much as you can in the light, of course. So I try and avoid it, but sometimes we have to. Be aware that when you do drive in the dark, particularly on unlit country roads, rural roads, if you break down, you are more at risk. So these reflective triangles, keep the hazard lights on, are very important. And if you are standing behind the car for whatever reason, which you shouldn't be, because that's where the impact will come, if you're doing something behind the car, just make sure you don't obscure the rear hazard lights when you're there. Checking your lights are working before you go out, or your lights, of course, is important. Automatic headlights is another one. The ones that are daytime running headlights that come on automatically or set or on all the time. I've noticed that many of those types of vehicles, the headlights are on, but the rear lights aren't. So you will see sometimes on the motorways cars coming towards you with headlights on, but when you look in your rear view mirror, they have no rear lights whatsoever. So just make sure you switch your normal lights on at night and make sure your rear ones are on too, of course. Pick which road types you go on. It's one thing driving through a town centre, which is well lit, but it's completely different and more difficult in many ways driving on a busy rural road where you've constantly got vehicles coming towards you. And fatigue, we talked about eye fatigue before, but naturally in the dark, particularly in the early hours of the morning, our body wants to shut down. So, and when we get fatigue, we lose concentration, we go into this trance, as I mentioned before. So avoiding fatigue, these are all factors to consider. Brake lights, one of my sort of pet subjects, if you like. A lot of drivers have this annoying habit, even during the daytime actually, but at night it becomes much worse in many ways, where they sit at a set of traffic lights for a few minutes and with their foot on the foot brake. So the advice would always be, if you're going to be stopping for more than just a pause, more than just a couple of seconds, a few seconds, then always, unless you need to have your brake lights warning somebody, put the handbrake on and take your foot off the foot brake, because it does dazzle people behind. So finally, on night driving, I'm going to run this video through. This is following a car that's entering a town. And you'll see it's well lit with street lights, but there are cars coming towards us. There are also lots of signboards up here. A yellow back sign which says this junction has been dangerous. There's a lorry approaching, and we're thinking about behind the lorries. Lots to think about there, and we know there are traffic lights ahead. So now we're watching: is there a queue? We're going to have to slow down. So I'm sitting well back here. The brake lights come on as we enter this sort of built-up area, and then as we pull up behind that car, we're hoping that that driver doesn't keep on the foot brake for too long. We can see there the pedestrian in dark clothing. Did anybody, or did many of you see the two pedestrians that were there before that pedestrian on the left near the road? This is a country road. Right up in the distance here, we have something. We don't know what, but there's something there. So we're beginning to just ease the speed off as we get closer. Then we put the main beam down because we don't want to dazzle any. Then we recognize a couple of pedestrians in high-vis coats, and it's very easy to see them from a distance. Just want you to imagine now if those same people were there, those dog walkers were there, one each side of the road with dark clothing on, and you happen to approach them at exactly the same time as a car came toward you with strong headlights, and you were dazzled. You can imagine it wouldn't take much, because there are no footpaths there to actually have a collision with one of those. So really, really important. Make sure if you are dazzled, the speed comes right down, preferably not suddenly, but right down to enable you always assume there's going to be somebody there. Right, that's a whistle stop tour through roundabouts and night driving. So now we're going on to the extra bit, the smart motorways. What is a smart motorway? Well, really, it's an attempt to manage the capacity on the motorway. So we have these gantry signs which can change speed limits, and that you'll find when, particularly in addition to the safety cameras which are on the gantry there, means people stick to that speed limit, and therefore you don't get all these acceleration braking type of movements, gap filling so much, which causes the log jams on the motorway. And then, of course, with the ability to close off lanes on the with an X here, you should never pass an X on the motorway. the idea was, well, why can't we use the hard shoulder as an extra running lane? That will manage the capacity better. Just want to point out before we go on that the original design, I believe, had radar sensors quite often. These lay-by refuge areas were quite regular, and it seems that as these were introduced more widely, the sensors weren't doing such a good job, and these refuge areas, there was a much bigger distance in practice between them. So there's a lot of fear, and quite rightly, about smart motorways. Recent publicity shared by the Highways England, this has only been out for a week or two, drivers who are unable to exit, this is motorways in general, drivers who are unable to exit the motorway at the next junction or service should put your left indicators on, move into the left lane, enter the next emergency area or hard shoulder, put your hazard lights on, get behind a safety barrier where there is one. And incidentally, if you can't get out the car for any reason because it's not safe, particularly if you've had to stop in lane 3, for example, the right-hand lane, the advice is to keep your seatbelt on if you have to stay in the car. That on balance would be safer than getting out and trying to mingle with the traffic, of course, but keep your seatbelt on. And call Highways England on that number, and then your breakdown provider. And of course, for any more immediate emergency, if you can't move across there, you dial 999. So that's the advice the Highways England have offered. Things to know about, really. Hard shoulder is always identified by a solid white unbroken line. If there's no speed limit displayed above it or a red X is displayed, do not use it except in an emergency. A broken white line indicates a normal running lane. If a hard shoulder is being used as an extra lane, use a designated emergency areas for emergencies. If your vehicle experiences difficulties, e.g. warning light, exit the motorway immediately if you can. And that's saying that in some ways, although it's possible to have a sort of catastrophic failure of the vehicle, maintenance failure of the vehicle, normally we get some warning of it. So as soon as we get warning of it, it's move left and try and leave the motorway wherever possible. Where people do actually have to stop in a live running lane other than the left-hand lane, it's normally, and it's a sudden stop, normally because of either an accident, a collision, or a blowout, a puncture. So that's normally, there are failures of the vehicle which can cause that to happen as well, of course. If you break down, put your hazard lights on. Most breakdowns are preventable, so really important, keep the car well maintained, check the tyres. Liz mentioned earlier about checking for bulges, cuts, something which not many of us do before a motorway journey, and that's really, really important. Just check there are no weaknesses in the tyre walls, and make sure you have enough fuel for the journey, of course. That cuts down the risk of stopping on the motorway. So we'll just quickly look at road casualties. This is from 2018, and I just wanted to sort of demonstrate how road types compare, because motorways, there were 107 fatalities in that year. On rural roads, including these very fast actual dual carriageways, who, by the way, don't have hard shoulders, and sometimes many miles between the lay-bys, had pretty much, or getting on to 10 times that amount of fatalities. So motorways in general are safe. There was an increase from 2017, and it may be some of that increase is down to smart motorways. I don't know, I haven't got the figures on that. But there's definitely a fear of smart motorways, and there are definitely things which can go wrong. So just as a final slide, are motorways unsafe? This is a difficult question to answer because it depends on what we mean by unsafe. Any road where vehicles are traveling along, including very large vehicles at 70 miles an hour or faster, there is obviously to some degree unsafe. There is risk in there. We've seen earlier that motorways are safer than rural roads by a long way, a factor of 10 by the looks of it. But certainly there are things which can go wrong on motorways and things which can go wrong on smart motorways, which may well make them less safe than normal motorways. For a start, there's nowhere safe to stop in an emergency. Well, again, it's an emergency where something happens suddenly, so we do all we can to avoid that. But that's a real fear, and quite a proper fear there. Moving back up to speed from a refuge area, actually, for me, this is the biggest fear. If you've moved into one of those lay-bys, to actually join the flow of traffic from one of those lay-bys is extremely dangerous. You're moving at sort of 10, 20 miles an hour to join a flow of traffic doing much, much faster than that. Very, very dangerous to do that. And I imagine the controllers of the motorway will close off lane 1 to allow a broken down vehicle to rejoin. But I'm not sure if that happens always. So that, for me, that would be one of the main fears. An emergency services access. So you can see the picture at the bottom is actually a dual carriageway, and you can see the drivers have separated to allow the emergency vehicles to come down the middle. And actually, I was driving in Italy a little bit a while ago, and they tend to do that out of habit. As soon as they see flashing lights, they just separate like that. So that's one way of doing it. The final word is just bear in mind that many fatalities, or certainly a certain number of fatalities, happened whilst vehicles are stationary on a hard shoulder. So hard shoulders are not necessarily the safest places to be. But again, I think just as a wrap up, really, I have great fears over smart motorways, the way they're operating at present, and maybe we should think about altering that. Okay, so we'll stop the share there, and that's enough from me.
Thank you, Graham. Very comprehensive, and certainly asked. We've got lots of questions that are coming in about smart motorways. I think Graham has pretty much covered most of them, but the little pointers we'll pick up later on in the Q&A section. So thank you, everybody, for your questions. Got lots to answer in a while, so it may take a little while. But in the meantime, what we're going to pass on to our final speaker today, Neil Greig from the Institute of Advanced Motorists RoadSmart team. He's the Director of Policy and Research and has a request to see if you're willing to help them on a project they're doing. So Neil, if you'd like to join us. Oh, I need to probably allow him to access to it. I think that's the problem. I stopped him a little while ago. Hold on a second. Sorry, Neil, it's my fault. I've blocked you in some point, but I will allow you to join.
Right, we're there.
There you go. Sorry about that, Neil.
No problem, Rob. Good morning, everyone. I'm not doing a PowerPoint. I'm just doing a very short introduction of a study we're doing. And it's partly just to update you on the study, but also an appeal for some help with the second part of the study. What we're doing is we have a Department of Transport grant to look at the opinions and experience of older drivers. And what we've done is we've done a big survey of over 3,000 older drivers already. That is now complete and has thrown up some interesting findings. But the second phase is we're going to try and run some small workshops, 10, 12 people talking through some of the issues, and we're looking for volunteers for that. So I'll be ending up giving you an email address, which will also be shared after the event, where you can actually get back in touch with us if you want to take part in these workshops. But the survey itself has actually thrown up some, it's one of the few surveys of such a high number of older drivers, 3,000 older drivers. And what it shows is that the vast majority, and we've heard some of this already, haven't actually started thinking about giving up yet. I think it's really heartening that over the last 2 weeks, these seminars have talked to over almost 700 older drivers who are clearly thinking about it. That's good. It would seem that most older drivers think they're good drivers and don't start thinking about it until they have a problem giving up driving. And what we found talking to people was that the most common reason for giving up driving was a medical issue, closely followed by cost. So medical issue and cost are the two top reasons, lots of other reasons after that, but those are the two top ones. And the other interesting finding, and I say this with some trepidation in front of Rob and Liz, was that we asked older drivers who would you listen to about giving up driving? And very strongly, they said doctors and opticians, and much further down the scale, they said family, and behind that, they said police, which was a bit of a surprise to us. Doctors got the strongest vote for the people they would listen to when it came to giving up driving. And the reason they don't want to give up driving is they talk to us about the independence, the quality of life, and the fact that their whole careers have been spent driving. But it is slightly worrying that, you know, from a large survey of older people, so few have even started to think about giving up driving yet, because one of the key things that the forum is trying to do is to get people to think about it, to plan ahead. So you don't wait till you have had that crash. You don't wait until you've had that medical issue before you stop giving up driving. So I was also interested to note what came up of the poll we had a few moments ago on support for having an eye test at 70, because our survey showed very high levels of support for that. And in fact, what we found was that most measures to give further controls on older driving are actually welcomed by older drivers themselves. They're a law-abiding bunch. They're quite happy to look into different ways of getting advice, different ways of giving up driving, so that there was similar levels, over 90% support for an eye test being linked to driver renewal as well. So that was interesting. But what we want to do in the workshops is we want to explore a lot of these policies. So we want to look at things like, you know, eyesight testing. We want to look at things like restricted licenses. For example, in some parts of the world, you can get a driving license when you're older that only allows you to go on local roads during the day. Is that something we might want to bring into the UK? And also looking at things like the content of driver reviews that we've heard about as well. So we want to discuss these things with people, having done this big survey. So, you know, I think everyone's very anxious to get to the Q&A session. So if you think this is the sort of thing that you'd be interested in, and this is a Department of Transport funded study that will potentially influence government policy going forward. They give us the money to do the study. They don't necessarily accept all our findings, but the study's being done between IAM RoadSmart and the University of Warwick, so it's a proper academic study. The workshops will take place in the summer and the next few months. We couldn't do them because of COVID. Ideally, we'd like to do them face-to-face, traditional sit-down, have a chat type workshops. We may have to do Zoom, which seems to work quite well anyway, but we'll be getting back in touch. So if you want to volunteer to take part in these workshops, to discuss all these issues around older drivers, continuing to drive safely, giving up driving, all the issues around that, then if you drop an email to us at info@iam.org.uk, and the email will be coming up in the information afterwards, and volunteer. We've got 38 volunteers from last week's session. As I say, it's small workshop, so we don't need a huge number, but if you're interested, please get in touch, and we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. And I'll hand back to Rob and we can get on with the question and answer session. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Neil. If you keep your video on, that would be great. If you're happy to take part, I'll ask the other speakers if they wouldn't mind joining us now. I should be able to put them all on. So yes, you can see us all. So welcome everybody. Right, we've had a very, very busy time with questions and answers. I can't promise that we're going to be able to answer everyone, but I will try and fast track through some of them if I can. This is one. If we are unsure of particular rules and regulations, what should we do? I'm going to answer that very quickly. Highway code is the recommendation. It is available online. If you just go into your web provider and type in the words highway code, it is available online on gov.uk with all the pictures and a lot more videos and things like that. So I'll quickly go through that one before we need to do any more on this. Any evidence that driving standards have lowered dramatically since lockdowns? It appears to me that that is the case, and probably is the case. Just, I'm going to mention myself before then, what we have as an Older Drivers Forum have produced a series of lockdown benefits for you, sort of bulletins on 4 different things. So if you went onto our website, and you'll see on the top line that gives you different boxes you can go into. There's one called advice, and under that you'll find lockdowns, and you'll see all those and you can read. But yes, I totally agree. I think a lot of people haven't been driving as much. I don't know, Graham, would you like to comment on that at all?
Well, I think the thing is, driving is a very multifaceted sort of thing to do. So it depends very much on mood. It depends on things like frustrations and stuff. So what you tend to find, if somebody goes out driving and they're particularly frustrated about something, which a lot of people are now, they don't act in such a safe, balanced way. On top of that, the only evidence I've got is after the first lockdown, people that are already a little bit vulnerable to their driving safety, after several weeks of not doing any driving at all, became much more vulnerable. They seem to take a downward step. I haven't got any evidence of other people actually doing that, though.
Yes, and I think the point that Liz made earlier, all the stats do actually show that if we travel less than 2,000 miles a year, and that's any age, then obviously we are more risk of an incident to happen because we lose our skills. It's like anything, you need to keep practicing at your skills in order to keep them keep them working properly. So another question that did come in on that was basically.
Can I just make a quick point on that last one?
Yes, do go, Neil.
It's actually very difficult to answer because it takes so long to get the data. We haven't had the data yet from the lockdown period. The data I've seen up to June last year suggests that crashes, deaths, injuries had gone down because traffic had gone down. But what does seem to have happened is that those drivers who like to be opportunistic have been opportunistic and have gone much faster, and the police have been catching a lot of high-end speeding. But the good news is there's so little traffic out there, they've actually been catching these people, which is good.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Neil. I think it's a very good point. I think just looking on some of the things, somebody did ask, obviously, when we haven't been driving so long, what sort of things could we do? And I think the appraisals that June has spoken about, and the likes of the courses and appraisals run by Graham and many other organisations like the IAM and RoadSmart is a great opportunity. You know, they should be coming back online. I think some of them are around about April the 12th. It should be a time that people are reviewing those. So have a look on our website. If you want to know what courses are available in your area, then go onto our website. Again, there's a page called courses. It can come down to individual counties, or you can click on there where you live, the county you live, and it will tell you what's available. So there's always something available to brush up on your skills. And if you have lack of confidence because of all this lockdown situation, really recommend either undertaking one of those or going out with a family member and getting them to sit with you to build up your confidence again. I'm trying to rush through some of these because we have so many questions. Another one, are there too many signs on our roads that are confusing, particularly at roundabouts and bends? And could this cause more issues for the elderly and cause more reckless driving? I'll go to, what do you think about that, Liz? What do you think on that?
It's interesting because when there are more collisions, there tend to be more signage, and then that obviously then causes more confusion. I don't know, there are reasons why signs are erected, and it's not great when you see advertising for other things that are not road related and, you know, should have been added to the road signs. So yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah, the more signage you get approaching, say, for a bend, for example, is probably because there's been more collisions at that particular location, which is why they've heightened the signs.
I know certainly the councils and various different things are very careful about the number of signs that go up. Unfortunately, the situation we do have is that we do have sign clutterage. And I know certainly if you drive along the road yourselves and decide, you know what, as a driver, I'm going to read every sign, then pretty much you're going to miss what's going on ahead of you. So it's really important that councils and organisations, when the highways authorities look at the signs and do they really need them? Because what you want to do is when you're driving along the road, if you see a sign, you should be able to read it and react to it. So having too many, you'll just switch off from reading them and they just are not worth anything.
Just one very, very quick point, Rob, is as drivers, what we do is we tend to look in front of us, directly in front of us, maybe a little bit further. So when there are a lot of signs together, we see them all at once. And some of those signs, depending on eyesight, you can pick up further back. So like a speed limit change or a warning sign, you know it's there. So you're not distracted by that one. You can then start looking at directional signs. So it's about trying to separate when you look at them a little bit, if you can. That may help.
Yeah, I agree. Any other comments from the panel at all?
Just quickly to say that there's a growing body of opinion worldwide among highway designers that with an aging population, we perhaps need to look again at the size of writing on signs. And it would perhaps, we do need to start thinking about designing signs and markings for the older driver, because there's so many more of them and there's going to be so many more in the next few years.
Absolutely. So another question here. Why at the age of 70 are we not required to undertake a refresher course and a medical to produce a certificate to the DVLA and car insurance before we can renew our license? This should be repeated, say, every 5 years. Our fees should be high enough to cover the cost of the extra staff to implement this. So it's an interesting one on that. Pretty much about mandatory testing really and renewal, that question. Anybody? I've got some answers to that, but I will let some of the panel themselves if they want to answer first.
Well, I was asked this on the last webinar, so I'll very quickly say what I said there. And the problem with standard assessment for everybody is you have to make it consistent, in my view. You can't have something different in one part of the country to others. So to make it consistent, you have to have a set type of route, which means often you have to take people well away from their normal area and go on a different place. We know that older drivers are the ones who start to get a little bit fearful, or where the skill level goes down, they compensate, they stay local. Massive difference between being able to drive to the shops and back and driving on a busy roundabout, for example. So if they've compensated, they're likely to fail a standard test, possibly. And so that's where the discussion comes. And, whether if you can't pass a standard test, should you carry on? Well, practice, people are carrying on quite safely by just compensating.
Okay, I've got some bits on this myself. Pretty much, myself and Neil sit on the older drivers task force, giving advice and support to that. And there's a new report coming out in September 2021, all about some recommendations and suggestions. And on the previous report that was covered back in 2016, it's an important factor to look at. There are quite a few countries that have mandatory testing at license renewal at the ages of 70 or 75 when it comes about. And actually those countries that have implemented mandatory testing for driving or fitness to drive for no reason apart from age alone actually have been shown that that is not effective. In fact, there's an EU report that's just came out yesterday or 2 days ago, which actually suggests that countries that implement that should be renewing their policies and only implementing mandatory testing if there's more than just age alone. So, for example, if someone commits the offence of careless driving, or there's an allegation or a suspicion of a medical condition that's caused something, then maybe more fitness to drive assessments should be looked at using driving mobility centres. But actually implementing them compulsory has been shown to be not effective and detrimental to actually older drivers. So that's a really important thing. However, there are factors, and we're looking at things about eyesight, because as we do know, eyesight is something that deteriorates as we get older. And actually, ultimately, we all should be having an eyesight test, proof of one, by application of provisional license holder as a new driver and throughout our career, really. It's something that really is important. And just on that last, in fact, the whole subject has been covered this Sunday on the Sunday Times. I've actually been interviewed by the Sunday Times just recently, and there's a whole article coming out on Sunday in the transport section. So hopefully you'll read a bit more on that. Anybody else wanted to have a quick question on the answer to that before I move on?
I think the answer to the question is actually in Liz's first table. 70-year-olds are no more at risk than 40, 50, 60. So if you're going to do it for 70-year-olds, then you'd have to do it for 30, 40, 50. I mean, obviously, as you get older, the risk goes up, that U-shaped curve. But, for 70, there's really no argument in terms of that sort of safety statistical argument to have a mandatory retest. Certainly, eyesight is something else.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point. And actually, Neil, you've led us on greatly onto the next bit, actually, because there's a question on here from the stats that Liz brought up earlier, that do you have crash stats weighted against miles driven? And actually, during this, I've gone away, and I know we do, and it's exactly the U graph that Neil talks about. So I'm just going to share that screen with people. It's from the 2016 report. I'll just try and share that with you. You're going to see lots of other things coming on at the same time. Hold on a second. Let me just share that screen. Right, you should be able to see this screen with the graphs that actually exist in here. And actually, when this is graphs which have been created from the Older Drivers Task Force back in 2016. And as you can see, there's this U shape. It's young male drivers are often our highest risk on one thing. And then we come down to middle age by miles driven, it sort of pretty much evens out. And then as we get into latter ages, it does go up, and certainly quite rapidly over 80. Now, one of the main reasons that is pretty much for the latter ages, I would say, is miles driven, because as Liz said earlier, if you travel less than 2,000 miles a year, then it can be a bigger problem. And unfortunately, it does seem to be older females sometimes that are the highest risk. And one of the reasons behind that is obviously the age group that we're talking about are predominantly the men would do the driving and the women wouldn't. And then unfortunately the men may pass away early and the ladies now have to drive and they haven't had the experience. So therefore they're now getting behind the wheel and sometimes not as experienced as they used to. So it is really important to keep your driving skills up on the road. So I'll just end that one and we go back to some more questions. I need to pull up my questions again because I've hidden them behind everything else. Hold on. Multitasking, that's what I'm doing. Right, let's have a look. This is another one. We had this on last week as well. And it's pretty much to do with emergency vehicles and certainly with traffic lights. If you're sat as a set of traffic lights and an emergency vehicle comes up behind you with their flashing blue lights and sirens, you know, what should we do to get out of the way, or what would you do? And Liz, you're the perfect candidate to answer this as a response officer for Thames Valley Police.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I had my driving assessment actually last week as well to make sure that I was still fit to be able to drive. And there's a really good video which Gem Motoring Group did called Blue Light Aware, and I would recommend everybody has a look at that. So yeah, when the blue lights and sirens go on, it means obviously we're needing to get somewhere. If we don't put the sirens on and we have blue lights behind you, we might flash you and indicate left. It means that we want you to actually stop at a place that's safe to do so, and we may need to speak to you. But if we're on a what we call an emergency to get somewhere, then the blue lights, the sirens will be illuminated. What you need to do is don't just suddenly stop. You need to keep moving and we'll get past you when it's safe to do so. And then gradually, as you can see that the road is opening out, indicate left so we know that you've seen us, and then you can pull over and we can get past. If you're coming to places like traffic lights, then we don't expect you to go through those traffic lights because you may come into conflict with other road users that have not seen us that are on green traffic lights. We will get past you. We have exemptions in order to be able to go right around a left-hand bollard, and we will make that decision as to whether or not it's safe for us to go past. Sometimes you're approaching a brow of a hill and you've got double white line systems. The lights may stay on, but we'll remove the sirens, and it basically means that we can't see beyond your vehicle, and we want you to keep going, and then when it's safe to pull over, indicate left, and then our sirens will go back on and we'll overtake when it's safe to do so.
Great, thank you very much, Liz. And again, it's that Gem Motoring Assist and it's Blue Light Aware. So if you just put that into your web browser, you'll come up. It's a great video to watch and really recommend, gives you the right advice for fire, ambulance, police, and all of those sort of things, to giving you what to do. So thank you very much for that, Liz. Okay, let's move on. Have a look at some here. This is one which we've come up. Now, it's a difficult one for lots of people to deal with, really. And this particular person says that, you know, their partner, is starting to deteriorate with their driving. They've had a number of strokes and they still continue to drive, still say that they're totally fit to drive, but they are concerned about what to do, how to have that conversation with them about it. And also they've asked, you know, can medical practitioners ask them to stop? What is the law and what can happen in relation to having that difficult conversation? I don't know who would like to answer that one. I mean, I can certainly, but okay, certainly. June, would you like to go through that?
Yeah, I just would pick up on that because we do get quite a few phone calls about this type of issue and just how to have that conversation with a driver that, you know, that they feel is no longer safe. And I'd say, first of all, put yourself in that person's shoes. So already try to think about where the difficulties are going to be for them. You know, where do they go? What do they do? See if you can come up with the solutions to their, you know, the problems they're going to bring up before you speak to them. So look at voluntary transport, you know, see if there's family members that can take them shopping, do that. Try and find out as many of the answers as you can before you have that conversation. I also think you do have a duty, if you're worried about them and their driving, and pointing that out to them, that you are concerned about, you know, their safety and the safety of other people. Maybe, you know, have a look at the car. If it's, you know, if it looks like the side of a crisp packet, then, you know, there's obviously issues there. If drivers are beeping at them more often, they've probably already got an idea that they're not that safe. It can be really, really emotive though. So broach it, have some of these solutions there, and then back off if they get really upset about it, and then go back. It gives them time to start thinking about it. Don't leave it, but, you know, give them a little bit of time, because they may get defensive about it or upset. But it gives them a little bit of time to think about it. Where you mentioned about the doctor, we've had a few instances where family members have tried to involve the doctor in helping to make this decision, and doctors seem to be quite reluctant to get too involved, because they've already got a relationship with, you know, with that person, and it's probably a relationship that they've had for a very long time. But I think trying to speak to the doctor and outlining your concerns, and potentially trying to get an appointment for them to see that person. I mean, you can report them to DVLA anonymously, and if you're really, really concerned and they won't stop driving, then that might end up being, you know, your last resort.
I think it's a really difficult one, and it's something with the Older Drivers Forum I have lots of comments that come through to me, and people asking for advice. And we have a page on our website called under Advice for Family and Friends, pretty much itemizing all those things that June has very kindly pointed out. Also got a number of videos on there which I did with Valerie Singleton, all about having those difficult conversations with your loved one, because it has to be done very carefully and in a certain way to do it. But the most important thing I have to say to you is do something. Don't just not do something. Don't decide to, it's too difficult, I'll leave it for someone else. The worst thing that you want is that something happens to them or someone else because of their driving, and you think, I could have done something about it. It is a very, very difficult thing, and there's a time that all of us will have to retire from driving, and that's why it's really important all of us don't become complacent, but actually look at the times that, you know what, I need to have regular eyesight tests, I need to get a driving appraisal regularly, as over 70 is a really good opportunity to do it, to really brush up on your skills and use independent advice, and ask your family genuinely, how do you feel, because it's a difficult thing. The last thing you or anybody wants for you to injure yourself or someone else. So it's an important thing, but ultimately older drivers are safe, but there are a small percentage who continue driving beyond their needs and when they're safe. So really important you take this importantly. Yes, go on. I'll just say one thing.
Very quick one there is just to be aware with stroke, it's not just about, I'm not talking about this case, it's not just about physical problems. It's about a stroke can, from what I understand, affect your cognitive impairment and eyesight and all sorts, and your judgment. So they can possibly lose a little bit of insight sometimes.
Definitely, there's lots of, and the start of dementia and Alzheimer's and various different things like that can have a problem. But there's lots of advice also on our website about medical conditions and how they can affect. And just because you've got the start of things like dementia doesn't mean you have to stop driving. There's a certain degree of these different things. So have a look on our website, lots of advice on those different things. This is probably a good one for you, Neil. We've been talking about appraisals and assessments today, and someone says, is there anything available for someone who rides a motorbike? Now, I know that there is for yourselves.
There is a general assessment. You can have a ride out with an IAM group. There's no such thing as a mature driver rider review at the moment. We just have a driver review. But you can sample what the IAM do on a motorbike, but it's not at the moment specifically linked to older riders. Although we do have quite a few older riders who are members of our groups, but it's not something we offer as a sort of product as such.
And I think that's pretty much normal across the field, unfortunately. Obviously, not many people are, the amount of people, 1% of all motorists are motorcyclists, so therefore sometimes it's not cost effective for organisations to run just for that. But I would recommend the IAM one. I'm a member of that group as well and do ride outs with them as well. So good organisation to join and help brushing up on your skills. Right. This is an interesting one. There's one about eyesight markers. I'm just trying to find it as well. My driving license has the code 01 on it. And basically, some years ago, they obviously had to inform the DVLA they couldn't read a number plate at 20 meters and needed glasses. And therefore, the DVLA then stick this 01 code, which means you require corrected vision to drive. They've then had their eyesight is improved either by laser surgery or something, and therefore they no longer need glasses. They've tried to inform the DVLA about this, and the DVLA said, oh, don't worry about it, we'll leave it on there. How do police feel about this? It's an interesting one to you, to Liz. I can answer it if you want, Liz,
Yes,
or I can throw.
Okay. I would look at a driving license and see 01 and go, well, where are your glasses then?
Yeah,
You've obviously got to wear glasses.
Absolutely.
And that conversation would be awkward. So yes.
It is, and I think that's exactly the case. It's an awkward one, and in fact, it's something that the task force, the Older Drivers Task Force, one of our recommendations is actually asking the DVLA to make sure that, you know, when someone has had a corrected vision, you know, and they've told you, you need to remove that 01 code because it can be confusing to police forces and police officers. But ultimately, for a police officer at the side of the street, what they would do is just get you to read a 20-meter number plate and see if you can read it at 20 meters. And if you can without glasses, well, you're perfectly okay to carry on driving. So don't worry totally on it. You're not going to get prosecuted because you're not against the law by having that 01 still on your license. Okay. Turning right, we mentioned earlier that was one of the big factors involving collisions involving older drivers was turning right. And somebody put hedgerows can often be a real problem with that. And actually we had this come up the other day. Certainly hedgerows, certainly this time of year with spring coming, we've got a lot more bushes growing up, lots of trees. If you've come across a junction which has problems, do get in contact with your local council and highways to inform them of that so that they can add it to their sort of pattern where they go around and trim those trees. But yes, extreme caution. And like Liz said earlier, if it's not safe for you to turn right out of it, best thing to do, turn left, follow down, come to a roundabout, come back, and that way avoid that threat that you might have turning right where you haven't got the view. Okay, let's have a quick look through some more here. Back to Liz, really, and not Liz, but sorry, June and Graham, really to do with driving appraisals. What is is the cost of these?
For the Buckinghamshire one, from April, it'll be £45, and that's for about an hour and a half, as we said, and from your own home, if you live in Buckinghamshire.
And Graham?
It's the same £45 for us if you live in Hampshire.
Yeah, and I think pretty much most of the courses, and I don't know, I may be putting you on the spot here, Neil, but for your IAM scheme.
Yeah, it's £49 for 1 hour in your own car from your own house. If you're lucky enough to live in Warwickshire, you can actually get them for free. And what we've actually been doing is we've been gradually building up police and crime commissioners have a little bit of money for road safety, and in 1 or 2 areas they've been putting it into older drivers, other areas putting it into younger drivers. But if you're looking to elect a new police and crime commissioner next month, have a look at the manifesto and see if they're offering to put money into road safety, which would be a good reason to go with them on. But yeah, there are 1 or 2 local schemes where it's actually discounted, but for us nationwide it's £49.
That's a great thing, actually, and especially with the elections coming up. It is really important to hound because some PCCs, crime commissioners, are really very good about adding road safety as a factor to them, and some aren't, unfortunately. So this is our opportunity to raise that with them, especially all of them out there at the moment. Right. talking about roundabouts again, Graham, with your talk that you had, and someone said, do we have to give way to the right at roundabouts? Surely that's the case. I had quite a few questions coming up saying, I thought I had to stop at a roundabout, or is it just giving way?
It's just giving way. They're designed really to try and keep the traffic flowing because it works much better than that. So if we can avoid a stop, really important. We're vulnerable from rear end collisions and it's more difficult to join a smaller gap. But, you know, obviously safety is the main priority. And if we're not sure, we have to make that stop.
Okay, thank you for that. And one extra one on here, someone went, do I need to have read the highway code when I renew my license at 70? Well, I can tell you the answer to this. As a police officer, this is the question I always ask people, because quite often they say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that sign meant that and this and the other. And I said, well, have you signed your driving license? And they said, yes. Well, actually, when you sign your driving license, what you're actually doing is making a declaration that you've read the highway code and you fully understand it. Even though it's not a legal responsibility that you have had read it, apart from when you're applying for your test and going through the sort of requirements for your driving license and driving test, there's no other requirements otherwise, but it is really important. So I'd always say, yes, if you're signing your license, be aware of the highway code and read it, because otherwise you might have a cheeky police officer like myself turn around and say to you, you know, have you read the highway code? You've signed your license. You may have made a false declaration. There we are. That's me being contentious.
I think it's also worth pointing out that later this year we might see one of the biggest changes to the highway code in living memory, in that it is being changed to have a hierarchy of responsibility. The government want to reflect in the highway code their priority for cyclists and walking and active travel. And basically, as a car driver, you are way down that hierarchy. Your responsibility at the top of the hierarchy is going to be pedestrians and cyclists, and you will have responsibility as a car driver. There are changes to things like giving way to cyclists when you turn left, if they're coming alongside you on the left, a whole raft of changes. And the point we've made to the Department of Transport, and your survey highlights this, if 80% of the people who are even in a seminar like this who are vaguely interested in road safety haven't read their highway code in the last 5 years, some not since they passed their test, how are you going to communicate these major changes to people? So I would urge people to keep a strong eye out for forthcoming changes to the highway code, because it is going to change it completely.
That's an excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you for that, Neil. Okay, this is an interesting one, and we've had quite a few questions on this today about some people saying when they're driving along the road, they often come across aggressive and speeding up a motorist, pushing them around. They may be traveling a little bit slower and people are pushing and hassling them behind. What sort of advice can we give to a motorist where they're having this sort of contentious problem going on? I don't know, June, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say would be, don't let pushy motorists push you to go faster either than the legal posted speed limit, or to a point where you're not confident, you're out of your comfort zone. We do hear this quite a lot, and I'd say, you know, if it's possible and they're obviously becoming frustrated and trying to push you on and want to get past, if it's safe, pull over somewhere and actually let them get past you, because you end up getting so obsessed with watching them in your rear view mirror that your focus is taken away from what you should be watching in front of you, and you're just sort of worrying about what's happening behind. So where you can, let them pass, especially if you are driving at the speed limit. Perhaps look at your speed, and if you are driving, you know, dangerously below the speed limit, then maybe that's a bit of an indicator that you ought to be having a driving assessment, just to see if there's anything that can be done to help you.
Yep, absolutely. Anybody else wanted to answer bits on that at all? But I think they're pretty much well covered. Okay, so one interesting question here, and I think this is something that's the future for us, won't be with us for a while to come, but actually, what is the panel's thoughts about driverless vehicles? It's a really contentious one, that one, isn't it? And
shall I start?
Go on then, Graham.
I'm sure everybody else wants to have their view. There's various things. It's a big conversation. So just in my view, very briefly, is we know that over 90% of collisions are down to human error. I think Liz mentioned that earlier. So the theory is if you take away the human, it's going to be much safer. The problem is if you do a trial with driverless cars and you get one fatality in a month, then it's highly dangerous. But we have to remember that human beings, 5 people are being killed every single day. They will be, well, if it's average, today, tomorrow, and every single day, and it's never in the news. So it has to be taken under that sort of context, really, I think. I'd much rather drive, but yeah, I think that's the context.
Great. Anybody else want to add to that, Neil?
I'd much rather drive. I think there was talk that we might have autonomous vehicles by 2021, 2022. We're here now, and they're not here yet. I think the true autonomous vehicle, where you are just the passenger and there's no driving at all involved, is still a good 10 to 15 years off in being available widely. It would be a good thing if that was available. That would be a really good option to help you give up driving as you age. But it's not here yet. And I think the problem we have at the moment is we're in this situation where some cars are being sold as autonomous. I mean, Tesla call their self-driving element of their car autopilot. And it is nothing like it at the level of skill it needs to be an autopilot. These are automated features rather than autonomous. So we're in a difficult period now because we have automated features coming on that people don't understand, don't know how to work properly, more and more automation with less training in it. But a lot of these things will help older drivers, blind spot recognition, lane keeping assist. These will all help people. Autonomous braking will help. But I think we need more training to bring them in. And I think we'll see a lot more automation, but autonomy, true autonomy, is still 10, 15 years away, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably, I'm not looking forward to it personally. I'm a petrol head through and through, like riding my bikes and driving my car and things like that. So
I was just going to add to that I think the semi-autonomous vehicles, they do concern me slightly. There's lots of fantastic sort of assistance on them, but it's the fact that you disengage a little bit from driving. If you've got cruise control on the motorway, then perhaps you do just, sit back a little bit and relax. Whereas if you're driving, if you're involved in it 100%, your concentration is on what's ahead. If you're slightly sort of giving the control over to the car, to get your reaction time will be delayed. So when you're driving and focusing, your reaction will be as quick as it can be, for you. But if you're slightly sort of relaxed and not engaging, then that's going to have an impact on your reaction time. So yeah, almost fully autonomous will be great because there'll be, it won't matter that you're not engaging, but just be aware if you do have semi-autonomous, be aware it might affect your reaction times.
And I think a really good point on that actually is modern day cars are having many more adaptions than these fitted to our vehicles automatically. And it's as we get older, sometimes it's very much more difficult to engage in this new technology and understand what it actually does. And that's why it's really important when you do purchase a new vehicle, you actually get the salesperson to go out with you, take you and show you the car, or even go along and have an assessment or an appraisal with one of the organizations here that we've mentioned, because they can talk you through what's fitted to your car and how it works, because it is important to understand, because sometimes your car can take over your braking for you and you're thinking, what the heck's going on? So important to be aware of what your vehicle's about. One last question. I've been bombarded with them, but we'll be here all night otherwise. So the last question is actually one we had last time, and it's either probably Graham or June. Again, when you're coming up to a junction and you want to turn right and a car coming towards you is wanting to turn right into a junction, should I go in front of that vehicle or should I go behind that vehicle when I'm turning right? The highway code said, what's the one thing, what should I do?
I think I'm sure June's got a view on that as well, but I was asked exactly the same question last time. And my view is that you work with the other driver, because the highway code says you can go around either side. It largely depends on the layout of the junction. But if the other driver coming towards you is determined to go around you, you cannot cut across them in front of them. There's advantage going around them. You get a better view. but largely you have to work it out between you, I think, and not and sort of hold back from the junction, try and communicate with them and figure out what they're going to do. Is that right, June?
Yep, that's exactly what I would say. Depends on the road layout and the other driver, but just slow down, make eye contact and work it out.
So I think that pretty much sums up everybody. So thank you ever so much to the speakers today for their comments. Number of people were asking Neil about the IAM email address that to send to again. So I don't know if you want to repeat that.
Yeah, it's info, INFO, at iam.org.uk.
And just to remind you that at the end of this, you will be sent an email from the webinar, which basically has a little survey, but also in a day's time, you'll get an email from ourselves, which has a number of links. So it gives you links to June's course that she talked about. It also gives links to other courses that you can find, and also gives the information about Neil and the email address on there. Or you can find it on our website as well under the webinar tab on the website. Gives the email address for that info as well. So thank you ever so much to everybody. Really appreciate. Obviously, please do visit our Older Drivers Forum website. It has lots of useful information on there to help. We hope to run more further webinars. If you want to know what's going on with us, then go to the website and click follow, and then you'll be able to be notified automatically when new things come online and when new webinars come about. So we looked at doing anything new in the future. We certainly want to tell you about them. So thank you very much to our speakers. And I think we've had a long session today. I really appreciate your help and support. And I'm just going to say goodbye to you all. So goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.